Hello, I'm Sensei Alex Kakya. Thanks for joining me for this evening's Dharma Sunday, where I take canonical Buddhist teachings and tie them with everyday life. The title of today's talk is On the Existence of Buddhist Gods. Before we get into that, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be great too. So, a few days ago, I posted something on my Twitter, which was somewhat provocative, I guess you could say. I asked the question of my followers, why do Westerners write off Buddhist deities as cultural superstition, instead of accepting the ontological pluralism that Buddhism requires? And I got a lot of feedback, some of it positive, some of it negative, but I can say it was a very good discussion. And I decided I wanted to follow up on that by discussing this in more detail this evening during this talk. Now, I want to point out a few things before we get started. First, I'm not here to change anyone's mind. If you're watching this talk, I assume that you're a grown-up, so you're more than capable of making your own mind and your own decision. My job is simply to present the information as I understand it, and then you can decide what you want to do with that. In addition to that, when I said the word requires, that seemed to be a sticking point, so I want to clarify. Buddhism doesn't require you to believe in anything necessarily. And what I mean by that is there's no one at the door checking your beliefs and, well, you didn't check this box, so you're out. If you believe in the Buddhist gods, if you don't, you can come and you can practice and you can meditate. It's fine. When I said requires, I was simply pointing out the fact that the supernatural exists as part of Buddhist doctrine. It's there, and we can't pretend it's not. If we read the sutras, there are individuals who are creating worlds, who are performing miracles, traveling between dimensions. There are a number of stories about the Buddha himself, flying through the air, shooting out light from his forehead. And for many of these individuals, the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, they are what we would normally consider to be gods. They are individuals with miracle powers. So I was simply making that point. What I would also like to point out is that the gods in Buddhism are gods with a little g, meaning that we relate to them in the same way that the Avengers relate to Thor in the Marvel Universe. Now, Thor is a god. He is very clear about this fact. He's not shy about saying that. However, he's not worshipped by his teammates. They see him as an individual with superpowers who can help them defeat Thanos. And the gods in Buddhism operate in much the same way. They are not objects of worship necessarily. They are objects of refuge. We look to them for help. They assist us in defeating our own deluded minds, purifying ourselves of greed, anger, and ignorance. So what I'd like to do today is lay out the philosophical underpinnings for the existence of the gods in Buddhism, why they're here, how we should or should not relate to them, and then also allow for some understanding around, okay, now what? Once I make my decision, I believe in the Buddhist gods, I don't believe in the Buddhist gods, what should I do? So if you ask me, and I'll just get this right out in front, are the Buddhist gods real? My answer, based on my experience and my understanding of the doctrine, would be yes. However, they're probably not real in the way that you think of as real. And I'll explain that here in a moment. So, let's get into it. Now, I'm going to start out with discussing something called ontological pluralism, which sounds complicated and esoteric, but if we break it down, it's a very simple thing. Ontology simply means studying the nature of being, or the nature of existence. And pluralism simply means more than one. So when I reference ontological pluralism in my tweet, I was simply referring to the fact that there's more than one way of being, more than one way of existing in the world as we know it. And we can see a simple example of ontological pluralism by looking at water. Water can exist as a liquid. It can exist as a solid in the form of ice. It can also exist as a gas in the form of clouds. But it's water in every case, but it's a different form, a different being of water. Water is ontologically plural. From the Buddhist perspective, our entire world is ontologically plural because we have the physical realm, which is the world we live in, the things we taste, touch, smell, etc. We have the mental realm, the things we think, and the mental constructs we create. And then finally, we have the spiritual realm, which is beyond name and form, sometimes called the absolute. Now, it's important to understand that in Buddhism, we don't draw any distinction between mental constructs and physical constructs. They're both equally real. So if we create a sandcastle on the beach, it's real. We can touch it, we can smell it, etc. If we create a construct in our mind, that's also equally real. And we can understand how this works by looking at some other mental constructs we use every day outside of Buddhism. Take democracy, for example. Now, democracy does not exist in the physical realm. I cannot pick it up like an apple, put it into a bag, and hand it to you. But democracy is very real. Every 4 years in the United States, people vote. A president is elected. That person passes laws with the help of Congress. Democracy exists, but it exists in a different way than a sandcastle on the beach exists. It's a mental existence, not a physical one. Similarly, if we look at international borders, if I start off where I am and start walking north long enough, eventually I'll get to Canada. But at no point will I cross over a big black line in the forest or in the ground and this was the United States and this is Canada. The border exists, countries exist, but the borderline is purely mental. It's a mental construct that has physical implications in our world. Now, from the Buddhist perspective, I'll say this again, the floor I'm sitting on is real. The mental constructs in my head are equally real. My speech is real, which is why we spend so much time and energy trying to purify our body and our speech and our mind, because we realize all three are necessary in order to end suffering for ourselves and for other people. Now, to understand why we say our mental thoughts are just as real as our physical actions, we need to look at something called Yogachara Buddhism, which is a school of Indian Mahayana Buddhism that existed from the 4th century up to about the 12th century, I believe. And it had a huge impact on Mahayana Buddhism. It's very influential. Its biggest promulgator was an individual by the name of Vasubandhu, who wrote something called the 30 Verses. And the 30 verses, like I said, have been very influential. If you look at Zen Buddhism especially, a lot of it came right out of Yogachara teachings and the teachings of Vasubandhu. The same is true of Pure Land Buddhism, however, they express the teachings in different ways. Now, Yogacharas believed that all of reality was consciousness only, or mind only. That's why it's sometimes called the mind-only school of Buddhism. And they believed this because, as they understood it, and as most Buddhists understand it, our minds are what allow us to interpret and understand everything that happens in the world. It is a mental transformation that takes place, which tells us what's real and what's not real, what's true and what's not true. So it is mind only that creates our reality. And to break this down further, they broke down our reality into 8 forms of consciousness. And those 8 forms of consciousness were broken further down into the physical, the mental, and the spiritual forms of consciousness. So we'll start up here with physical consciousness, which was created by sight consciousness, hearing consciousness, taste consciousness, touch consciousness, and smell consciousness, which in the West we sometimes call the 5 senses. However, we don't use that word sense in Buddhism because there's a slight philosophical difference here. Now, from the Western perspective, I, as an individual, exist separate from the rest of the universe. So I'm over here, the wall is over there. I see the wall with my sight sense, and I determine that the wall is there. However, from the Yogachara standpoint, seeing exists, but there is no seer. Hearing exists, but there's no one who hears. Instead, the sight consciousness comes this way, and the hearing consciousness comes this way, and the smell consciousness comes this way, and all these different physical consciousnesses come together, and at some point a mental transformation takes place, and Alex appears. And this happens over and over and over again, an infinite number of times every second of every day. So you could think of it as I'm seeing the wall and my brain is saying wall, wall, wall. Then I see the floor, my brain says floor, floor, floor. And then I look over there and I see a window and it says window, window, window. And all of that information comes together over and over and over again. And now I see the world around me. Except there's no I here. There's no one who sees. What happens is all my physical consciousness comes together with my thought consciousness. And it forms what's called a mana, or the illusion of a separate self. So we have the physical realm of consciousness, sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell. We also have the mental realm of consciousness, which is made of thought, my thinking, and mana, which is the illusion of a self. And that word, illusion of self, sounds strange, but it's actually easy to understand if we look at something like a thunderstorm. Now, we all know what a thunderstorm is. There's clouds, there's lightning, there's thunder, there's rain, there's puddles that form in the street, the sound of rain falling against the window. And yet, the rain is not the thunderstorm. The clouds are not the thunderstorm. The puddle is not the thunderstorm. It's all of those things coming together. At some point, I don't know when, it stops just being rain, cloud, lightning, and it becomes storm. In the same way, for us, sight, sound, hearing, thought, etc. all come together, and at some point, we don't know when, it becomes me. It becomes I. So in the same way that a thunderstorm doesn't exist because there's no one thing that we can point to that says this is the thunderstorm, I do not exist because my hands, my feet, my skin, none of that by itself is me. Even if we were to take my brain out and chop it into pieces, there's no one thing in there that's Alex. It's all of these things together that form me. There's all these things together that form the storm. So I, as a person, am ontologically plural. I exist and I don't exist at the same time. This is true of the storm. It's true of the wall. It's true of our entire existence from the Yogachara standpoint. All of reality exists, and it does not exist simultaneously. And we can understand why in Buddhism we say the physical realm is no more or less real than the mental realm, because all of it is a result of mental transformations. I think, therefore my thoughts exist. I think, therefore this room exists. None of it happens without the mind. So from the Western standpoint, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. For a Buddhist, the saying might go, the world thinks, therefore I am. Slightly different, but very important difference in the take, which is why the Indian philosopher Buddhaghosa famously said, there is suffering, but there is none who suffers. Doing exists, although there is no doer. And he said that, I believe, in Visuddhimagga, the path to purification. So, this is where the teaching of emptiness comes from, and the teaching of non-self. That we exist, we are here, someone's talking to you right now, but we don't exist as a separate, permanently abiding self. We are part of a much larger whole, an endless stream of consciousness that is constantly changing and moving, coming into being and coming out of being every moment of every day. So, in that way, it's a little bit silly to say Buddhist gods don't exist because we can't experience them physically, because we understand that physical existence is not the only mode of existence that there is. There's also mental existence. There is also spiritual existence as well, which I skipped over, but I'm going to come back to it here in a moment. But I want to make this point. To say that the Buddhist gods don't exist because Kannon, the Bodhisattva of compassion, can't walk up and shake your hand. From the Buddhist view, that's kind of like saying Thor is real because he's in the Marvel universe, but Batman isn't real because he's in the DC universe. They're all comic book characters in the end. Similarly, from the Buddhist perspective, we exist here in the physical realm, we're real. The Buddhist gods exist in the mental realm. They're thought constructions, mental formations, just as real as we are, but they have a different form of existence. So of course, this begs the question, do the Buddhist gods exist because we think they exist? Or do we think the Buddhist gods exist because they were already here? I don't know. That's kind of a deep philosophical question. It's kind of like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? No one knows, but we do know we have chickens and we have eggs. We don't know if we came first or the gods came first, but from the Buddhist perspective, we know that we are here and the gods are here. So now we have to decide what to do about it. Now, the third mode of consciousness, which I skipped over earlier, is the spiritual mode. And I skipped over it because the spiritual mode of consciousness is where the Dharmakaya exists, or the storehouse consciousness. So everything comes from the Dharmakaya. So we start with the Dharmakaya, and then that leads to mental formations, and then that leads to the physical realm. And then things from the physical realm lead to more mental formations, and it's a cycle that continues every moment of every day. This is explained most easily in the Trikaya teaching of Buddhism, which states the Buddha body, which is all the mental formations that I talked about earlier together, exist in three forms. Just like we have the physical, mental, and spiritual realms in Yogachara. Well, in the Trikaya teaching, we have the Nirmanakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Dharmakaya. So starting at the bottom with the Dharmakaya, this is the absolute. This is the spiritual realm. This is that which is beyond name and form. When Taoists say the Tao that can be named is not the Tao, they're talking about the Dharmakaya. That's the truth body of Buddha, the primordial essence of enlightenment. That's where Buddha nature comes from. And then above that, we have the Sambhogakaya, which is the joy body of Buddha. We could think of that as the mental realm. That's where the Buddhist gods exist. Kannon, Amida, Monju, these celestial beings that help us to see through our delusion, to end suffering for ourselves and others, they are Sambhogakaya. And then finally, we have the Nirmanakaya, which is the physical body or the transformation body of Buddha. And that's us. All mental transformations, all the same at a certain level, but different. Just like the physical world and the mental world are the same at a certain level, but they're also different. And the role of Buddhist gods, remember I said they're not objects of worship so much as they're objects of help and objects of refuge. Their role is to act as our connection between the physical realm and the spiritual realm. They are our connection to the absolute. And this is important because if we go too far into the material realm, we end up with hedonism. Buddha tried this and he almost died. If we go too far into the spiritual realm and we ignore our physical existence, we become an ascetic. That's no good either. Buddha also tried that and he almost died. It is only by practicing the middle way between the physical and the spiritual, between the spiritual and the mundane, the absolute and the conventional, that we're able to find inner peace, that we're able to end suffering for ourselves and other people. So the role of the Buddhist gods is to do exactly that. They are mental constructs that when we take refuge in them, we are temporarily pulled away from our defiled minds, our mundane existence. We are part of something bigger than ourselves each time we chant Namu Amida Butsu, every time we give an offering to Kannon. And through their example, they show us how to live in the mundane world, in the physical realm. So when Kannon shows great compassion for all sentient beings by going into the hell realms and trying to save all of the demons she finds there, that's an example for us in our own lives when we try to be compassionate to the individuals we see, whether they like us or not. When Amida shows tremendous mercy for all sentient beings by creating a pure land where we can go to and practice the Dharma, that then paints an example for us, that we can be merciful and loving to the people that we meet in daily life. So the celestial beings exist both as celestial beings and as mental constructs at the same time. They also, like us, like the rest of reality, are ontologically plural. Here and not here at the same time. Reverend Soga Ryojin, who was a Pure Land Buddhist minister, described this relationship between us and the Buddhist gods in a very interesting way. He said that they were symbols that helped us understand aspects of the absolute, aspects of the spiritual world that were beyond our understanding. So it's hard to truly understand compassion. It's a very out there concept. We can talk about it for hours and never get a good grasp, but we can understand Kannon. When we hear the story of Kannon going into the hell realms and saving the demons who are there, and continuing to do so, continuing to try even after she fails, well, we can understand that. That's something concrete we can grab onto. Mercy, grace, these are very esoteric concepts, very out there parts of the absolute. But when we see the example set by Amida, that's something we can grab onto. When we practice gratitude by chanting Namu Amida Butsu, well, that teaches us how to practice gratitude in the rest of our lives. When we make an offering at our altar, that helps us practice generosity so that we can make offerings to other people. Whether it's creating or offering food to a loved one, giving an employee a raise at work, leaving a large tip for the waiter or waitress at a restaurant. Practicing generosity by being generous towards a celestial being helps us do that for the mundane beings in our lives. Again, the Buddhist gods are the connection between us and the spiritual world. So Reverend Soga Ryojin said that Amida Buddha, speaking about him specifically, Dharmakara was the embodiment of the Dharmakaya, or the storehouse consciousness. And that, by extension, means that Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light, was the embodiment of our own enlightened nature. So when we take refuge in Amida, when we chant Namo Amida Butsu, we are taking refuge in a celestial being. We are also taking refuge in ourselves, in our own Buddha nature, in our goodness that is integral to our being as humans. And as we do this, as we practice with the Buddhist gods, with the Buddhas, with the Bodhisattvas, we realize that they're not so different than ourselves, that they actually don't exist outside of us. Rather, they're mental constructs, they're symbols of things we already possess. Kanan is our compassion. Amida is our enlightenment. Monju is our wisdom. And only because we are human beings with defiled minds, with greed, anger, and ignorance, do we have to temporarily look outside of ourselves so that we can then come back and see those same qualities within us. When we take refuge in the gods of Buddha, we take refuge in our true enlightened selves. Amitabha. So, that was the talk for today. I hope it was helpful. If you enjoyed the discussion, please, again, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be great too. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you feel about the philosophy that I laid out today? Do the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, are they helpful in your practice? Do you not engage with them at all? Let me know in the comments. And just a few announcements. So this is Dharma Sunday. We do this every Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. It's broadcast at this channel. And every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, we do meditation and sutra study, which is a little bit more involved. That includes a 15-minute guided meditation, a reading from a Buddhist sutra, followed by a Dharma talk. So, I hope to see you there. Until next time, Amitabha.